Welcome to the debate. Today, we find ourselves standing at a distinct precipice in international relations. We are looking down into a valley that might hold the salvation of a war-torn region, or quite possibly the dismantling of the global legal order as we've understood it since 1945. We're discussing the establishment of the Board of Peace, a new, highly controversial institution initiated by President Donald Trump to oversee the ceasefire and reconstruction in Gaza. But the question before us isn't merely about bricks and mortar. It's about the very architecture of power. Is this board a genuine instrument for stability, or does it represent a dangerous shift toward imperial dominion?
It's a question that really forces us to strip away our illusions, doesn't it? To look at the world as it actually is, rather than how we might wish it to be. The traditional mechanisms, the United Nations, the established protocols of diplomacy, they're creaking, perhaps even breaking. And into this vacuum comes, well, this new proposition. It is blunt, it is transactional, and it is undeniably powerful.
To navigate this, treacherous terrain with the necessary intellectual rigor, we are turning to a piece of profound political analysis. It's titled The Board of Peace, Justice or Dominion, by the writer Sami Malik. It is a text that resonates with the dignity of history and the urgency of this very moment. Malik doesn't merely report on the events, he interrogates the soul of this new global order.
Indeed. Sami Malik provides us with a factual bedrock for our discussion today. He paints a vivid picture of a world where, well, moral purity might be a luxury nations can no longer afford, and where leaders are forced to make calculations of survival that would have seemed unthinkable a decade ago.
And I'll be arguing the perspective that this board, as described by Malik, represents a fundamental threat. It is an experiment, to use his terminology, that risks subordinating justice to the whims of unchecked power. It effectively replaces international law with imperial fiat.
And I will take the position that while the board is flawed, perhaps deeply so, it reflects a geopolitical reality we simply cannot ignore. When the house is on fire, one doesn't ask for the firefighter's credentials before letting them hold the hose. If the old institutions are dead, we have to ask what replaces them.
A vivid image, though I fear the hose may be attached to a petrol tanker. Let's begin with our position statements. I want to draw directly from Sami Malik's historical framing. He reminds us that from the Roman Empire to the present day, institutions created in the name of peace have this terrifying tendency to morph into tools of control. Malik argues that the Board of Peace is exactly such an entity. It arrives professing to salve the wounds of humanity, yet it seems structured to enforce dominion.
You see history as a warning. I see it as a catalog of necessities. But please, elucidate the structural danger you see here. What makes this so different from any other aid organization?
It is the difference between a mandate and a monarchy. Malik draws a devastating technical comparison between this new board and United Nations Security Council Resolution 2803. Now, for our listeners, Resolution 2803 was the standing legal framework for Gaza. It's a creature of law. It has a fixed expiry date of 31 December 2027. It has strict reporting obligations, and it is explicitly provisional. The Board of Peace? It's of indefinite duration.
Which implies a long-term commitment, does it not?
It implies permanence without accountability. It has no expiry date. As Malik warns, institutions founded without temporal limits tend to harden into citadels of power. And furthermore, the leadership structure is, well, frankly, it's imperial. The chairman, President Trump, possesses the power of veto, appointment, dismissal, and even the right to name his own successor. This is not a civil servant acting as a steward of peace. This is, as Malik phrases it, a sovereign.
I see why you find that chilling. However, let me offer the counter perspective, the one viewed through the lens of realpolitik. Sami Malik admits in his text that reconstruction is necessary. Gaza has been reduced to a symbol of tragedy. The United States is withdrawing from UN bodies. NATO is being labeled ineffective by the very power that underwrites it. In this vacuum, what is the alternative to the board? The participation of nations like Pakistan, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. It suggests that for the people on the ground, action is preferred over procedure.
Action at what cost, though?
At the cost of pride, perhaps. or the cost of procedural niceties. Malik notes that for these nations, participation is a matter of survival. It represents a sign of hope to mitigate tragedy. If the UN is paralyzed and the U.S. has withdrawn from over 60 international organizations, a figure explicitly cited in the text, then perhaps a flawed imperial board is the only mechanism left that can actually move resources. We're looking at a transactional world order. We may not like it, but standing outside of it might just be suicide.
That is a grim pragmatism. But let's move into the core of the debate. You mentioned the withdrawal from the UN. This brings us to our first major point of contention: the structure of authority versus the rule of law. Malik describes the board's governance as resembling a private club rather than an international organ. I mean, look at the executive board. It includes personal friends of the president, a former British prime minister, his son-in-law. This is power based on proximity, not merit or neutrality.
It's certainly a departure from the civil service model we're accustomed to.
It is more than a departure. It's an aberration. Malik argues this structure makes the chairman a sovereign. When you have a body where membership, finances, and influence emanate from a single center, and where that center creates a circle of loyalty rather than an institution of law, you are not building a peace process. You are building a patronage network. How can we expect impartial justice from a political style rooted in transaction? If a nation disagrees with the chairman, does its aid get cut? That isn't law. That's extortion.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the current rule of law is functioning effectively enough to be the only standard. You argue that this is a private club based on proximity. I would ask, is the UN Security Council not also a club, fossilized by the geopolitics of 1945? Samiullah Malik notes that the U.S. has withdrawn from dozens of UN bodies. If the primary superpower decides the old rule of law is broken, then effectively it is broken.
So we simply accept the law of the jungle?
We accept the law of leverage. Look, Malik points out that smaller states are seeking shelter beneath the shadows of greater powers. You call it proximity with disdain, but for a nation like Azerbaijan or Paraguay, both mentioned in the text, proximity to the board's chairman might be the only security guarantee that actually works. It is perilous for democracy, yes. Malik admits it's an uncomfortable fact. But if the choice is between a noble, impotent UN and a corrupt, effective board, well, the starving do not eat nobility. The board is offering a seat at the table where decisions are actually made, not just debated.
But that effectiveness is an illusion if it is arbitrary. And this idea of the seat at the table leads directly to our second point: the dilemma of participation, specifically focusing on India and the global south. Samiullah Malik dedicates significant thought to India's position. Prime Minister Modi was invited a test of global consequence, yet India was absent at Davos.
A silence that spoke volumes, as Malik wrote.
Precisely. Malik suggests this silence reflects an intellectual hesitation. To join the board is to risk making your nation ornamental. If the locus of decision-making is entirely in Washington or within the chairman's personal circle, then India's voice carries no weight. It becomes a softened endorsement of Israeli positions or American imperial interests. Malik quotes a diplomat who said, expecting justice from such a transactional system is just naivete. India stayed away because it recognized that not every invitation is an honor. Sometimes, being invited to the table just means you're there to applaud the chef, regardless of what he cooks.
That is a compelling argument, but have you considered the cost of that absence? Malik also highlights that India's silence might be driven by fear, the fear that even the decision not to decide might prove costly. India has massive stakes in West Asia. Its energy security and expatriate workforce trade routes.
But does joining a private club protect those interests or hold them hostage?
It might be the only way to protect them. The text mentions a terrifying possibility that the board might expand its remit to other conflicts. There are leaked charters hinting at this. So imagine if the board turns its gaze to Kashmir. If India is outside the room, standing on high moral ground, while the board makes decisions about its borders, wow, that moral ground will feel very lonely.
You are describing a protection racket, not a diplomatic forum. Join us or we regulate you next.
I'm describing the world as Samiullah Malik paints it. He notes that 59 countries signed, but only 19 showed up to the ceremony. That disparity reveals the tension. They signed out of fear, pressure, or political expediency. They're torn between the principle of independence and the necessity of alignment. In a transactional world, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. India's hesitation is understandable, but can it afford to remain pure if this board becomes the parallel global system? The silence of the global south isn't just hesitation. It's the sound of nations holding your breath.
That brings us to the nature of this parallel system and our third point. Dissent and the definition of peace. We must discuss the case of Mark Carney, which Malik highlights as emblematic of this new regime.
The former governor of the Bank of England, a man of significant stature.
The very same. His invitation was rescinded. And why? Because days earlier he had criticized the US-led global order. Malik uses this to prove a crucial point. The board tolerates participation without obedience as little as it tolerates failure. It demands unanimity. This is an institution with an intolerance of dissent.
If you cannot criticize the order, you cannot improve it. You are merely ratifying the will of the chairman. It confirms that the board is not a forum for resolution, but an echo chamber for authority.
I admit the exclusion of Carney is a sharp indicator of the board's temperament. However, I come at it from a different way. Recall what Trump said to the attendees. You are the most powerful people in the world. Malik identifies this as a redefinition of power.
A redefinition that unmoors power from ethics. Perhaps. But it defines power as alignment. The board isn't pretending to be a debating society like the UN General Assembly. It's an executive instrument. In a crisis, maybe diversity of thought is seen as a weakness by this administration. I'm not defending the morality of it, but I am questioning whether justice, as you and I define it, is even the goal here. Malik asks if justice is possible when power is unmoored from ethics. The answer might be no, but the follow-up question is order possible? Because right now, we have neither.
Order without justice is merely a prison. Malik writes that peace is not a gift, not a contract. It is a moral covenant. If the board demands total alignment, it's creating a fortress of power, not a vessel for peace. It is replacing the consensus of nations with the dictates of a few.
And yet, notice the specific phrasing Malik uses regarding the Global South. He says their participation exposes that principles frequently yield to geography and economics. This is the crux of our disagreement. You want the board to be a moral covenant. I fear it's simply a geopolitical inevitability. If this is indeed a parallel global system intended to replace the UN, then standing on the sidelines shouting about Mark Carney's invitation might be noble, but it renders you obsolete.
Being obsolete is better than being complicit in the dismantling of international law. Malik notes that the board represents a new lexicon of power, where influence alone is the measure of worth. If we accept this, we are accepting that might makes right. We are returning to a pre-modern era where the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must.
Or, we are acknowledging that the modern era has failed. The U.S. is withdrawing from the UN. That is a fact. The board is here. That is a fact. The question is not, is it good, but how do we survive it? The nations that showed up, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, they are betting that survival requires proximity to the chairman.
We survive it by refusing to grant it legitimacy, by pointing out, as Malik does, that history will summon it to its dock. We must not mistake the quiet of the graveyard for the peace of the just.
History has a long waiting list for the dock. In the meantime, the reconstruction of Gaza waits for no one. The board offers a mechanism, however flawed, to move forward.
Let us look toward the conclusion, then. We've outlined the terrifying structure of this board, its indefinite duration, its sovereign chairman, its resemblance to a private court. We've looked at the impossible choice facing nations like India, to join and be ornamental or abstain and be vulnerable. And we have seen, through the Carney example, that this is a regime of obedience.
We have, and while I maintain that the board is a harsh reflection of a broken world, I cannot deny the weight of Samiullah Malik's warning. This is a transactional body. It's efficient, perhaps, but it is cold. It reflects a reality where, as Malik writes, principles yield to geography. For many nations, this isn't a choice between good and evil. It's a choice between leverage and irrelevance.
And that is a tragedy in itself. My conclusion aligns with the core thesis of Sami Ullah Malik. He writes that peace is a moral covenant. If we build institutions based on the thirst for authority rather than the hunger for justice, we are building on sand. The Board of Peace, with its lack of accountability and its imperial structure, risks becoming a fortress of power. It may rebuild the walls of Gaza, but it may also imprison the future of global diplomacy behind them.
It is a critical test. As the text says, is this the strengthening of peace or the entrenchment of power? I suspect it's the latter, but I fear we may not have the luxury of refusing it. The shifting sands of geopolitics may have already buried the old order.
A chilling thought. The verdict will not be delivered today, but it will be delivered. Those are the closing words of Sami Ullah Malik, and they ring with the weight of prophecy.
Indeed, we are watching history decide which path to take.
We want to thank you for listening to this exploration of a pivotal moment in international affairs. And we must explicitly thank Sami Ullah Malik for his insightful and beautifully written article, The Board of Peace, Justice or Dominion, which provided the foundation and the intellectual rigor for our debate today.
His work forces us to confront the uncomfortable truths of our time.
Until next time, keep questioning the narrative.
And keep watching the horizon.
Goodbye.